it really kind of appealed to me, because it's exactly the sort of thing that I'm a champion for, kind of project-based learning and for cross-curricular learning. And as a drama teacher, and I'm sure it's similar as an art teacher, you feel like you're teaching, all these different subjects are not isolated. And the second you leave school, I remember being at university and being like, oh wait, well, why are we doing history and like English literature, and why is and all these things are so intrinsically linked. And Lynn Hannay really touches on that. She starts with a kind of experience where she sees two of her old students, and they talk to her about the experience of the school, and she's about living history experiences is the title of this chapter. And it being incredibly, she quotes Confucius, tell me and I forget, show me and I'll remember, involve me and I'll learn. And she looks at kind of experiential days and schemes of work, which it's like kind of completely immersive. And it was interesting because that kind of student coming back to something, I remember coming into primary school one day, and we had this workshop, and I didn't really understand what was going on. We were given materials to make like a camping site or whatever, and I never forgot that learning day, because it stood out so much. And it was kind of communication skills and team building. It's also an introduction to Lord of the Flies for a year 6 class, and it just really struck a chord with me, and it really stood out to me. So she basically does kind of she basically looks at the entire curriculum and ties it around a living history kind of experience. So specifically things like World War II, especially in London, there are so many resources built around that, and so much history built around that it's very easy to kind of take outside school experiences and things like that, look at relics, look at things where people are involved. When she talks about her learning activity outline, she talks about an emphasis on the arts, a focus on the whole child and stages of development, and that most importantly that it's reviewed annually to kind of keep up with kind of education trends and ideas of the teachers. And it seems like there's a big input from staff at the school as to where they can go with these, and it seems very, very communicative and collaborative, and that everyone has a voice. Is the way I viewed the school. So yeah, it's kind of curriculum that is immersive, thematic and holistic. She's obviously like a big advocate for the arts in general. I think you have to be for a kind of immersive learning experience. So she talks about how they might kind of set up the school with children climbing over sandbags, and the classroom layout, and they would get kind of historically accurate costumes and things like that for the children to kind of try on, or they might all kind of have like a flat cap or something, like a token of that time and place, to help with the immersiveness. Maybe like Winston Churchill's on the radio, for the call to war, with that famous speech. But what I just loved is just looking at her curriculum, where we had like through this one theme of World War II in history, we've got the geography of the world maps, the European world maps, changing borders. You've got Judaism and the Holocaust. Sorry, I hope I said like World War II, right? And then World War II songs, jive music for music, and jive for dance, coordinates for maths. It was just an incredibly inventive and cohesive curriculum. I guess like there was something that stopped me on that really, which is just like, if you're looking at because at the moment I'm going from secondary curriculum and I teach drama, as I said, we are very lucky because I think we must be the only subject that does not have a national curriculum. I'm not sure about music, but there's no national curriculum, so you can just make it up. And it's amazing because I've got ultimate freedom as a drama teacher. I can just go down this avenue. If a class aren't getting something, then I can go into more detail. I started to look at that and I thought, how does that work with things like Ofsted or with those kind? I just kind of brought up some questions like, well, what if you're not supposed to be learning about coordinates in, you know, in that year? What if one of the things on the curriculum doesn't tie in? And if you're a kind of state school, you know, how much freedom do you have to do that? And it was really inspiring to see that. I think she talks about, you know, people not always with Ofsted kind of following her train of thought and her ideas about education. But then being able to kind of show the evidence and evidencing everything and show, you know, that it had a lasting impact on the learners' engagement. Yeah, so I just found it like really, really interesting and kind of exactly the kind of education that I'd love to be involved in. So for me, the kind of reflection I had, I've been teaching in Thailand now for the past 6 years, and some of that was in primary and some of it was in secondary, most recently secondary drama. And so one of my biggest barriers there was, obviously it was a Thai bilingual school, so I had a barrier to like Thai culture, and so I had to do a lot of research on, you know, elements in Thai theatre. And so I looked at shadow puppetry, which has its origins in Chinese theatre. And it's kind of like one of the earliest forms of animation, really. It's ancient. So we started to look at that, but I applied interdisciplinary methods. So students had a role each. I would have, they'd all be responsible for the content together, but one person would be kind of overlooking and evaluating one aspect. So we looked at storytelling, we looked at kind of research of stories from other cultures. We had someone editing, but we tried to access as many different parts of the curriculum as possible. We had music that students would research from other cultures. So they'd pick a story, they'd have to pick a story from one continent. They got one continent each, and they had to pick a story from that continent and translate that into a puppet show. So they would have to kind of look at as many things in that culture that they could put into their puppet show. So the types of music they might be playing, the types of design we might be looking at, colors that might represent something. So we looked at art, we looked at design. Then we actually physically built the puppet show as well. So we integrated ideas of mathematics and ratios, drawing to scale, measurements, making sure the puppets they were designing went to the scale of the puppet show that they'd kind of created. We looked at different materials for DT. So what would make the best material for a puppet show? What would make the best material for the puppets? We looked at kind of moving parts. We looked at the science behind light and mixing lights. So it was kind of an all-encompassing thing. Each lesson kind of had a different aspect from a kind of multidisciplinary kind of learning style. And it was completely student-centered. Students were responsible for their own progress. You know, they had a rubric that they could look at for guidance. But the end result was absolutely beautiful. And I found it really interesting. And I think, yeah, one of the children shouting out, "Oh my God, it's science." I was like, yes, everything is interlinked. It was really, really rewarding. And the students took real ownership, and it also just understand that they needed to base their learning in drama from other subjects as well, to reinforce their knowledge.